I would say that this is probably the biggest challenge for any composer, particularly younger composers who are trying to find their voice. And that is to try to find your voice. Because it's very tempting to go with the crowd. And back at Juilliard, the temptation was to have everything sound bizarre. Now that I've had more time to re-examine what kind of music I really am interested in myself, I've had more time to, I would say, find my own voice as a composer. And there's an expression you've maybe heard that a lot of musicians use, which is to express, don't impress.
Oh, really? I've never heard
And
that.
yeah, well, the idea of that is to don't try to show off with what you're doing. You know, don't try to have all the notes going all the time for every instrument, or use every amazing huge chord you can think of, or every extended technique you can possibly think of. Because in the end, why are we doing this as composers? That's the question I always try to ask myself. And the answer that I always keep coming up with, which is, by the way, something we were not taught at Juilliard, the answer is to reach people, to reach the audience on an emotional level.
Yes.
To convey human emotions that are universal emotions. And there's many ways to do that. And then the second part of that, once you've sort of gotten people's attention with the way that you're writing, with some idea that you have a unique voice that you're trying to express, that'll get you a minute or 2 minutes into a piece, and people will think that's interesting if it's well done. But then what do you do? And that's where the second part comes in, which is storytelling. I have to say I have learned this mostly on my own by going back and studying the great composers, the late Beethoven quartets, and the Debussy quartet, for example. And of course some of the larger symphonies, but really more in the chamber works, because that's where you see the art of development. And development is just a fancy musical term for storytelling. But the idea is that you want to start somewhere at the beginning. You offer an idea. And then what do you do with it? How do you keep the audience interested? Well, it turns out that the human mind is very good at recognizing patterns. And we just love to do it. We recognize faces from years ago. And it's very true with music too. So if you present a little theme at the beginning, and then you have sort of a contrasting section, and then maybe a minute goes by and you present that little opening theme again, people will remember that.
Yes.
But the trick is to do it in a way that maybe it's slightly different when you reintroduce it.
It's like character development.
It's very much like character development. And, you know, if you want to talk about characters, I think that's not a bad way to think of it, since we're talking about storytelling. But I think some of the best pieces that I've done, it's almost as if you do have a collection of players on a stage that are having different roles and different conversations. And one might appear and say something, and then maybe somebody else comes up, and maybe there's a bit of an argument that happens between two people, a conflict. And these are the kinds of things that keep people interested. So it's emotion and storytelling. That's the secret sauce.
Right.
Much more than any particular style. Because I enjoy writing music sometimes that's atonal. Just the word atonal can seem kind of like a frightening word to some people. But it doesn't have to be. The problem with a lot of atonal music is that it doesn't obey the first two laws that I was talking about.
Storytelling and,
which is
and emotional appeal.
Some emotional connection to the audience and storytelling. I think the canvas is open, and if you think of all the different styles that are available today, as a buffet, for example, I think you can pick almost anything out of the buffet and put it on your plate, and it will work. I think we're living in a kind of wonderful golden age for composing. Now, some people don't think so, and some people 100 years ago thought that all the music had been written. Actually, 200 years ago they said that after Beethoven. There were composers that seriously were kind of annoyed with Beethoven because they thought he'd written all the music. As we know, that wasn't exactly true. 100 years ago, similar things were said. And there's no reason to think it's any different now. I would say the difference now is that you have this amazing smorgasbord, to use the buffet analogy one more time. You have serious, really good music that's being written now that's extremely tonal, maybe even sort of 18th century sounding. And at the same time, of course, then you have incredibly adventurous stuff with bending notes and using extended techniques on the violins and maybe using the wood of the bow to tap on the bottom of the instrument, things that might sound a little silly at first, and sometimes they're overdone. But on occasion, it's kind of fun to incorporate a few of those things if, and I go back to those two rules, if you're telling some sort of story which connects to the audience. And I'll just tell you something else, which is, I think, the best compliment that I've ever gotten.
Yes, please.
Well, it's not somebody who comes up and says, oh, I really like your piece of music. That's nice. It's nice to hear that. But one of the best compliments I got was somebody who came up and they said that your music really reached me emotionally. I had written a piece, for example, that was about remembrance. It was about remembering loved ones. And this one woman came up and she said, when I was hearing your music, I remembered my husband. And it kind of gets me choked up a little bit. But that was a wonderful thing to hear, because I think that's what being a composer is all about. We don't need more music that is just sort of interesting or weird, or even just beautiful, if that's all it is. We need music that achieves some sort of higher purpose, I think. And the other thing I would say to younger composers is, don't think that you have to just stay in your composing cave and write music every day, and that'll sort of automatically cause you to connect with your audience in a meaningful way. I think, of course, hone your craft, learn the skills, learn how the instruments work, and continue to write, but live a life. Go out and do things that have nothing to do with music, because that will help you connect with your audience. Because you have to remember, your audience has not been sitting in a cave writing music.
Right.
And I'm not sure you'd want that particular audience anyway. So, having gone through some difficult things in life and some wonderful things in life, I feel like I have a very broad palette now, emotionally, to draw from.
Yes.
And there's a lot to be said for that. So I would encourage younger composers to go out and do something crazy.